Hey guys, Kellen here with Droid Life, and we're skipping the unboxing this time around and going straight into our first impressions of Sony's new Xperia Z1 Compact. So if somebody told you that CES 2014 was mostly a bust, I don't know that you would necessarily want to argue against that, though I would point out one highlight, and that would be the Sony Xperia Z1 Compact, or if you're in Europe, since that's the only place this phone's currently available, it would be the Z1 Compact. And why I suggest it's the highlight of the show is because Sony did something a little bit different. They took their high-end phone, which is the Z1 or the Z1S, took all the good parts about it, outside of maybe the display, and packed it into a device that's legitimately smaller, or compact, if you will, hence the name. So you can see holding in hand, definitely a compact device. Now, I've spent the last 3 or 4 days with it through a snowstorm in Portland, Oregon, and have really started to like what I'm seeing here. Now, I haven't spent a lot of time with Sony devices in the past. They're mostly European, and we are, essentially a US news site. So we don't cover a lot of them, and then by the time they get here, they're old news and we sort of ignore them. This phone, though, because of its size, because of the idea and the approach Sony took, I picked it up, imported it from the UK, thought we'd give it a spin. We'll probably do a full review on it, but I want to just give you guys some initial thoughts, just because, again, I'm really liking what I'm seeing so far. So let's talk specs for a second. We're looking at a 4.3-inch 720p display. So if you're not a fan of anything smaller than 5 inches or even 4.7-inch displays, 4.3 is obviously going to be small, and it's also 720p, not 1080p. And I will say right now, the display is easily the worst part about this phone. Now, that's not necessarily a good thing, since the display is what you look at and touch often and most, but it's something that maybe you could deal with if you want a little bit smaller display. If you get past the display, you're looking at a Snapdragon 800 processor. So the newest and best Snapdragon processor from Qualcomm that's in almost every other high-end device, right? So you've got that. You've got 2 gig of RAM, which is essentially a standard. You've got a 2300 milliamp hour battery packed inside, which so far has proven to be a beast. I've gotten through full day, no problem on a single charge, with a mix of HSPA Plus and Wi-Fi. Never ran into a battery issue whatsoever. The device is fully waterproof, so you could take it in a pool, take it swimming, dunk it, drop it in a toilet, take a picture in the toilet, whatever you want to do, it will still work underwater and come out living just as it was beforehand. And speaking of camera, to top it all off, Sony packed in a 20.7 megapixel camera with Sony's Exmor RS mobile image sensor. So you're looking at a really high-end camera, the best mobile processor available right now. You've got LTE connectivity if you're, depending on the country you're at. Mine's just an HSPA Plus model. You've got a good battery. You've got waterproof, like I mentioned. It's all 9.5 millimeters thick, the body here. The design really comes off feeling high-end. So, if you pick up, some Samsung devices, maybe even the Moto X, maybe even the Nexus 5, they come off feeling a little plasticky and a little cheap. This phone by no means feels cheap or plasticky. You've sort of got this whole metal look and frame around the outside with this sort of clear plastic backside. It's also minimalist, but yet still sort of industrial at the same time. It's a very well-made and pretty-looking device, at least in my opinion. So let's show you what it compares when you throw it up next to a Nexus 5. So here it is in terms of size here. So you can see it's definitely smaller. The Nexus 5 has a 5-inch 1080p display, so that would make sense that the Nexus 5 would be a little bit bigger. And you can see holding in hand, the Nexus 5 does just look bigger. So I personally have some issues doing one-handed tasks on the Nexus 5. I have absolutely no problem with the Z1 Compact. If you want to compare it to something similar then in terms of size, you got the Moto X. So they feel about the same in hand, which could be why I like the Z1 Compact, because I'm such a big fan of the Moto X. The weird thing is the Z1 X does look to be slightly bigger, maybe taller. Definitely not as wide, I don't think, but maybe taller. And that's probably because the bezels that Sony put on there. But in hand, they feel about the same. The Z1 Compact is definitely a little more squared off, a little more iPhone-ish, if you will. Not quite as comfortable as the Moto X, but similar size, very easy to use in one hand, which I can appreciate. So overall, so far, build, processor, specs, all that stuff, really, really something I was looking for, especially when it comes to size. Now, if we talk about that downside again being the display, and you probably noticed it when I tilted this back, you can see the fingerprints now all over this thing. So it's a fingerprint magnet. It collects fur, it collects dust, it collects lint. I'm constantly wiping this thing off. I don't know why that is, but it just attracts everything known to man that could possibly stick to it. You can also see there's some pretty heavy chin and top bezels on there. But, so far it hasn't been a deal breaker. It's not my favorite display, but the rest of the package so far seems really nice. So if we talk software, this is your lock screen. So up here, you can swipe between your widgets, or you can swipe this way to get into your camera. To unlock it, you can either swipe down or swipe up, and that gets you into your home screen. So if we look at home screen, you've got sort of this 3D carousel effect. You can add new pages, remove them, all that good stuff. It kind of looks like some of the third-party launchers you've seen through Google Play. Here's a look at the app drawer. Sony's skin isn't necessarily the best. It's also not the worst. I've definitely seen worse. They also have this nice little slide-out drawer in the app drawer that you can customize it and things like that with. It's got on-screen buttons, so if we do a swipe up from there, you get into Google Now really quickly. So you got to appreciate that, especially if you're an Android purist. It does have a multitasking button, so you can swipe away items here. And they also tossed in some other tasks in here as well. So you can actually pop up and open up a little mini browser, or you could pop up and do a quick little note, or you could do, I believe there's a calculator in there as well. There's a timer in there. So you've got all these sort of little mini apps. So if you're a fan of Samsung and you like the whole multitasking, multi-window thing, you've kind of got that on these Sony devices as well. So that's sort of a look, at the UI. If we sort of swipe that down and go into settings, this is sort of the UI of the settings menu. It's sort of traditionally set up, although you can see there's some Xperia stuff in there. Sort of a different way of looking at things. It is running Android 4.3. Not really sure when it's going to get updated again, to KitKat or something like that. But so far, that hasn't necessarily been a huge issue. What I will say, though, is the camera so far has been phenomenal, at least in my early tests. While I've been in a snowstorm in Portland, haven't necessarily gotten out and taken a whole bunch of beautiful pictures. I have taken a bunch around my house in low light and good light. And so far, it does a really, really good job. You can sort of... it focuses well. The camera's fast enough. It does a lot of image processing to try to get your images to look right. And so far, I think it's doing a pretty good job. You can sort of get that up close, a sort of depth of view, sort of blurred background effect on a lot of stuff. It does a really good job with macro shots. I've really been impressed so far with the camera. And when your mobile camera is, the only camera you have on you, sometimes you want it to be good. That's definitely something that should be on your list of pluses. It's also got some extra modes in here. I downloaded this background defocus, which was an Xperia Z1S sort of exclusive feature, but the APK has been pulled and you can load it on this and it works really well. And that essentially allows you to focus on something near to you and then have it blur the rest of the background out. It's actually a really cool feature. So there's that's available. But again, so far the camera's been amazing, and while I need to test that fully, get out and about, out of my cave and sort of look at that, I will say that so far the results there have been nice. But the performance is amazing with that Snapdragon 800 processor. Not a lot of stuttering. Everything just sort of flies through. It's not stock Android, but the skin's not necessarily overwhelming, though I will say that they threw in a ton of bloatware. And this isn't even a carrier model. This is a unlocked model from the UK. So if there's this much bloatware on here now, I can't imagine what they're going to put on carrier versions. But essentially, I just wanted to share initial impressions. Z1 Compact. This thing comes to the US. I suggest everyone give it a fair shot. Again, the 4.3-inch display is a little, on the low end, and it's not great. I will show you, the viewing angles on this thing. You just start tipping this thing back, and it just goes black on you. So the viewing angles, and this is something that's affected all Sony devices for as long as I can remember. I believe I have the brightness all the way up on this. It just goes black. You can't really see much. So the viewing angle is not necessarily great. The display is a little bit of a downer. If they had upped the display, really, really would have been a device worth considering by everyone. But we know with 1080p displays, 5-inch devices, that could be a tough sell. But if you want a smaller compact device, look at this thing in hand. This is a one-handed operational device, and that's something I can really, really appreciate. So anyways, just wanted to share some early thoughts. We'll have a full review on this and write up later on. But this has been the Xperia Z1 Compact, the Z1 Compact for our friends in Europe. And we'll have more. So if you got questions, you want to see more on the camera, you want some more UI tours, anything else, tips on how to clean the display, let me know. We are Droid Life. Be sure to subscribe to us down below. Check us out. We'll be back with more. Peace.